Junji Ito is one of my favorite writers. Thanks to the internet and translations of his works, his stories are read by people worldwide. His longer stories like Uzumaki, Gyo, and Hellstar Remina are must-reads for any fan of cosmic horror. His one-shots also often deliver spine-chilling stories. Manga like Slug Girl and The Amagara Fault are surreal masterpieces. But Junji Ito's art and writing really shines through when he uses apocalyptic cosmic horror as a backdrop to tell us a story. The thought of reality collapsing in on itself is a huge part of most of his stories. We aren't told why or how something happened, we only know that something is responsible. This mysterious nature leaves blanks in the narrative that we get to fill. This, alongside the gut churning imagery, is what appeals to fans of the weirder side of horror. Another very fascinating detail that draws in readers are the main characters and their point of view. In a story like Army of One, we get the point of view of a recluse who is facing the terrifying, mysterious collective murders. In Uzumaki, we get the story of someone who longs to leave everything behind in the land of spirals, until the spiral itself stops him. And don't even get me started on Tomie. But either way, when browsing through Ito's collection of stories, it feels like every story is a hit. That is until you find Snow White, Frankenstein, and a few other stories that lacked originality Ito brought to his stories. But alongside his adaptations, sometimes some people disregard pretty cool stories, and that is why I am here to tell you about the hidden gem among the discarded stories, Black Paradox. Despite being a story almost as long as Gyo, Black Paradox isn't really brought up in conversations about the brilliance of its writing. There are great characters, surreal comedy, and an implication of humanity digging their own grave. Sounds like a fun story, right? Then why is barely anyone talking about it? There is a few reasons, but before I get into what happens in the story, I am going to issue a spoiler warning and a self-harm warning. The story begins like any other, with a group of people getting together to kill themselves. They met through a website called Black Paradox. So these four adventurers decide to end their lives by using the car's exhaust pipe. But on their way, the characters tell each other stories about doppelgangers. So let's meet our cast of characters, shall we? First is Maruso, who is not Tomie. She hasn't seen a doppelganger and wants to end her life because she feels like a fate worse than death might befall her. Secondly, there is Taburo. He has seen a doppelganger and continues to see it in crowds. Next, there's Barachi, a lady who has half of her face ruined because she kept staring in the mirror. She also feels like the person in the mirror is alive and wants to replace her. Last but not least, we have Pitan, a tall man with a weird jawline. Apparently, he was part of a university that wanted to make life like androids, and Pitan was used as a model for their project. This went weird, and now he appears like the robot more than the original. So he decided to let the machine win, and chose the easy way out, I guess. Now I know what you are thinking. A story about a bunch of fellas killing themselves. Who would have a problem with that? Joking aside, the reason this story wasn't very well received could be due to having themes about suicide and the self harm we inflict upon ourselves. But before we dwell into the heart of these juicy themes, let us get a clear understanding of this story. After we are introduced to our crew, they reach what they assume is their permanent resting place. But Maruso and Taburo begin to suspect that something is wrong with their companions. When Pitan makes motor noises when he moved, and more concerningly, when they discover that Barachi doesn't have a reflection, Pitan stabs Taburo, turning him into a shadow, and Maruso throws a rock at Barachi, shattering her like a mirror. Then Pitan begins to chase Maruso while she ran until she saw a car extremely similar to their car. But to her surprise, the other three are still alive and huffing the exhaust. When they woke up, they immediately exited the car and asked her who she was. Apparently, she was going to commit huffing exhaust with a bunch of doppelgangers. But before they can discuss anything, the robot Pitan comes at them and runs away, so our heroes says no to death because shit is weird. But after living their lives for a while, the gang decide to get together once again. Maruso makes sure her friends are real this time. By the way, don't commit suicide with your imaginary friends. Do it with your real friends, like a normal person. I'm sorry, the idea of suicide pacts are so weird to me. But Japan will Japan. This time our genius Taburo comes up with the plan to swallow a bunch of sleeping pills. Oh, I almost forgot. How did Maruso end up going with the doppelgangers? That's a good question, to which I have no answer. But this doesn't ruin the story because she can see the future. That's a whole other story. But when you end up asking the question why or how in a cosmic horror story, the best answer is something like this. The rules followed by the incomprehensible are rules that are beyond our comprehension. But this time, all four of them counted down and swallowed the pills. Soon enough, Maruso figures out that three of them didn't actually swallow the pills. But unfortunately, Pitan trusted them and followed through, ending his life. But the three liars don't even get a moment to mourn as Pitan's pale corpse rose up and began to throw up something. It was a spherical crystal of unnatural otherworldly beauty. I will be calling it paradonite. After seeing this object, Barachi takes it home and tries to get it appraised. Although Pitan survived death, the Black Paradox gang were more interested in the globe Pitan threw up than they are in him. Barachi gets this priceless item appraised and somehow comes to the conclusion that it is a solidified soul. Soul as in, human spirit, like that. And afterwards, Pitan gives them a bunch of orbs that he has been throwing up since the last attempt. And afterwards, Pitan gives them a bunch of orbs that he has been throwing up since, the last attempt. And then all of a sudden, for no reason at all, Pitan begins to inflate until his stomach breaks open, releasing a ton of paradonite. This whole thing happens, everyone jumps out of the car, and Maruso decides to just drive the car and uh, leave it near a hospital with Pitan's corpse. I'm not going to explain the entire story, but allow me to summarize what the other characters did. Barachi and Taburo picked up as many as they could and either sold them or gifted them to people they admired. The orbs look magnificent, but attempting to damage them will result in an immediate release of energy. This was found out the hard way when Taburo attempted to smash it with a hammer. This wave of energy even reignited Pitan's broken android, who decides to follow Barachi and Taburo. Meanwhile, Maruso was convinced by the doctor who stole Pitan's corpse to come with him to an isolated villa. While those two travel to his isolated villa, Barachi and Taburo are considered terrorists for selling and distributing explosive marbles. Because exploding marbles did what they do when people attempted to break them. With very few places left to go, Barachi goes to her plastic surgeon's villa with Taburo, and they take Pitan with them as well. Well, when I say Pitan, I'm talking about the robot from now on. But when they make it there, Barachi coincidentally sees a plastic surgeon kissing Maruso. The plastic surgeon was the doctor that asked Maruso to his villa, and guess what? She said, "Why not?" and came with him. Then Barachi leaves heartbroken and camps out in the forest with Taburo while Maruso discovered the doctor's creepy secret. Apparently he has cultivated Pitan's stomach before he died. Now it is in a giant tank and it has a giant portal into another dimension, one large enough for a man to swim into. So he hires a professional diver. And well, that doesn't go too well. Amidst this revelation, Maruso collapses from shock, and she was tied up to a bed by the doctor. Then all of a sudden Barachi bursts in while looking like this. When Maruso wakes up, she begins to tell Barachi, who is now covered in bandages, that something terrible is going to happen. But neither the doctor nor Barachi cares. The doctor and the other two bring Pitan's android to the tank. Then the crazy robot jumps inside the stomach and starts to bring out piles of paradonite. This excites the doctor because this discovery will make him an extremely rich and famous person. When I say extremely rich and famous, I'm talking more so than he is now. And after removing the portal that was growing in her face, he began to cultivate it in a separate room. This created a separate portal that also paves the way to the dimension filled with dazzling lights. So the doctor manipulates Barachi into going into her cultivated face portal. She refuses, and instead they try to make another robot like Pitan, except this time it's based on her. This robot manages to go in, but the atmosphere in that dimension melts the robot. By this time, Barachi has undergone surgery and is back to normal. The government has suspended their arrest warrant, so Taburo lives to be in his own villa, a villa that he bought from selling his paradonite. We don't see him for some time. Meanwhile, the creepy doctor attempts to kiss Maruso, who lost it because she was strapped to that bed for weeks. I cannot even imagine the stench she must produce, and not to mention the cruelty of having someone tied up until they lose their minds. But Barachi, who was okay with all of this, sees the doctor attempting to kiss Maruso. Again, characters in Junji Ito's stories have weird reactions. Sometimes he was more upset that he cheated on than him torturing a woman. Either way, Barachi pours gasoline over herself and the face portal, but the doctor acts quick and pushes her into the portal. Now he had only Pitan to do his paradonite mining. So he goes looking for Taburo and gives Maruso a brain scan which reveals a strange tumor. The doctor comes to the conclusion that it could be a portal, so he removes and cultivates the tumor in a giant jar thing. While he was doing that, he also goes to Taburo's mansion, where he was absent. Instead, him or his body, a glowing shadow was on the wall. And when he looks at it, Taburo walks out of it like an absolute Chad. Without really any convincing, Taburo decides to come with him after Barachi fell into the portal. After Barachi fell into the portal became unviable for anyone else to enter because it is her portal and hers alone. But this didn't stop scientists from probing it with different devices. Although their best equipment failed to last even 5 seconds, one of the cameras saw a human flying at it. It was Barachi flying towards the portal like Adam Warlock. Then she leaps out of it and hands the doctor a paradonite. Now with everyone from the Black Paradox reunited, the future looks brighter than the realm of paradonite. After her tumor was removed, Maruso became satisfied and lost her fear of the unknown because the future was perfectly visible to her. Soji decides to share it with the others. Because paradonite are solid souls, when they run out of them, there won't be anyone born to Earth. There won't be anyone born in Earth. Okay, either way, no one will be born if the paradonites are all mined and used as fuel. And since the doctor made himself known as the harbinger of this hazard, those who once respected and admired him will do everything they can to make sure he faces the grisliest fate possible. But Maruso had no desire to save humanity or to save the doctors, so she and the other three follow the doctor's orders without complaint, fully aware of what is to come. The first time I read it, I felt like this was one of Ito's weaker stories because it refused to rely on grotesque imagery. But after a while picking it up and reading it again, this is less about paradonite and more about the nature of self-destruction. The story starts with a group of suicidal fellows, and it has many instances of this being brought back. The doppelgangers refused to do it. Afterwards, our friends just go back to their lives until they once again attempt this because they were reminded how hopeless their life is. This time no one actually does it except for Pitan, but instead of gently passing away, he goes through excruciating pain, coughing up something the size of a tennis ball, and he spends rest of his days constantly struggling and suffering. Then his soul gets tied to the robot and it becomes nothing but a slave to the doctor that listlessly brings back Paradonite. Barachi felt helpless when she found out that the doctor was trying to cheat on her, so she used her life as a bargaining tool, only to be pushed into her own demise. Meanwhile, Taburo wallowed in his misery, too afraid to seek help, afraid to end it all, until he became a shadow of his former self, moving back inside his own shadow. And that leaves us with Maruso, the person who was forcefully kept alive by the doctor. She grows into an unfeeling, amoral monster that would gladly watch humanity die just so she can watch the doctor suffer. And the way that humanity was going to go extinct because of the very ambition of human beings is a sweet little bit of frosting on top of this sandwich of nihilism. But what is the point of the story, I hear you asking? This is the point. At least this is what I think. Taking your life is a bad thing, but depending on your circumstance, it could stop you from suffering. The point is to discuss and solve problems like this with people who love you the most. If you don't have anyone, at least try to find someone worth being alive for. Because right now you might not feel like your life will get any better, but you won't be able to find out if you committed suicide, right? So don't do it. And yeah, that's it. That's the whole thing.